me. Hi. Thank you for that great introduction, Luke. I hadn't thought about our trip for some time, so that was nice to recall that memory. It's been really great visiting CIBIO and being here in Portugal. I'm coming from Philadelphia, where I work at Drexel University. And unfortunately, Drexel has made the decision to no longer continue this program under their umbrella. And so we're trying to come up with solutions for that. And I think it's a really nice match with CIBIO. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to continue all the work that we've been doing over these many years. Is it working? There we go. Okay, so I've been working in Equatorial Guinea for about 11 years, but the program is much older than my involvement. And I think to Americans, why are we working in this small Central African country? I think neither Luke or I would probably be here if talking about Equatorial Guinea if it wasn't for this woman, Gail Hearn, who started the program 25 years ago. She was a researcher interested in particular in the drill monkey, and came to Equatorial Guinea right at the time that the National University was beginning. The first National University in Equatorial Guinea only started in 1996, I think, or 1998. And it was at the same time that the country had recently discovered oil and was developing very quickly, or was about to develop quickly. And so she led an expedition to observe the drills and understand a little bit about them, but also became very concerned with the conservation outlook for that species, as well as the other primates in Equatorial Guinea. Bushmeat hunting or wild meat harvesting is an important part of the culture in Equatorial Guinea and has been for a very long time. And so, working in that context, trying to work with local communities and the government to ensure that these animals can persist into the future is the vision behind the program. So currently the program is a collaboration with Drexel, the National University of Equatorial Guinea, and Indefor, which is the national, the Protected Areas Authority in Equatorial Guinea. And what we do is we promote conservation through research, educational outreach, and community engagement. So here we have some local students and volunteers measuring a big leatherback sea turtle. We have a whole host of educational programming that we do in the school system. And that's Antonia, who had been a student with BBPP, then graduated from the National University and became an educator. And now she has her master's in environmental education and continues teaching and working with the program at the National University. We also do things like ecotourism, where we host visitors who are interested in observing the wildlife of Bioko in a responsible way at our different sites. And through those programs and the partnerships that we have to implement them, employ locals in a more sustainable way. And then finally, we're always... They're not hearing me? Okay. Speak more loud. Okay. And finally, what we always strive to do in everything that we're doing is to have some sort of an impact. So these two pictures here are showing a situation that occurred a couple of years ago when the police had actually confiscated some green sea turtles from fishermen that had harvested them off the southern coast of Bioko, and we were able to work with the local government to release them back into the Gulf of Guinea. So it was a nice story. Not all of my stories are nice, but this was a nice one. So just to situate us, here we are, Equatorial Guinea, a small country in Central Africa. It has kind of a strange geography, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But it actually straddles two different major ecosystem types. You have the lower Ghanaian forests, which are in Cameroon and in Nigeria. And you also have then the Congo Basin rainforest, which extends all the way over into Congo. Here we have Bioko Island in the northernmost part of Equatorial Guinea, which is actually very close to Cameroon. There's Mount Cameroon right there. And it forms this very interesting archipelago, the Cameroonian line, and actually extends into Cameroon. There's some islands above the Mount Cameroon there. And then you have the continental region, which I'll speak a bit about later, and where Luke's research group has focused primarily in this part of all throughout the mainland of Equatorial Guinea, and then Audubon. Interesting thing about Bioko is 40% of it is protected. On the mainland, less of it is protected, but to some degree, all of the protected areas in Equatorial Guinea are theoretical and don't really have too many actual management programs happening. So our situation in the caldera, which I'll speak about, is a little unique. So just brief history, it's kind of interesting as it relates to Portugal. Bioko was actually discovered by a Portuguese explorer, Fernando Po, and so in Spanish, the name of the island was actually known as Fernando Po for many years. It was never colonized by the Portuguese, though, because Sao Tome and Principe were much more interesting from the development of cacao, and so these islands were colonized, but Bioko was left alone, and it was also home to the Bubi people, and therefore not as attractive, much more difficult to set up cacao plantations and that sort of thing. And then on the mainland, you have several different ethnic groups, including the Fang. And then Audubon is actually very interesting because it was actually settled by some kind of slaves that were from Angola originally, and so they speak a Portuguese Creole, which means that Equatorial Guinea now can be part of the CPLP community, which is something that relates to the Gulf of Guinea Research Program, and is an interesting little connection. So yeah, it became an independent country in 1968, and the current president is actually the only second president of the country. He took over from his uncle in a coup 10 years into independence, and kind of rescued the situation from a really desperate situation. The first 10 years of independence in Equatorial Guinea was not a smooth transition, and there's a lot of ethnic violence. So some of that continues to this day, as far as tensions between the island and the mainland. But it's an interesting context. It was one of the poorest countries in Equatorial Guinea for one of the poorest countries in Africa for many years, and then discovered offshore oil resources in the mid-90s, which really brought the country into a whole nother space, and it became very quickly overnight one of the wealthiest countries in Africa. Of course, that wealth was not evenly distributed, and so it cemented power in interesting ways. But it also allowed for the development of a lot of infrastructure and the creation of the National University. Now we have a whole new private university that's developing on the mainland, as well as just incredible infrastructure throughout the country, which is both good and bad as far as opportunities and risks. Because of the Portuguese connection, I wanted to share this image of Audubon. This is where they speak the Portuguese Creole. I've been there several times. It's a tiny island in the middle of the ocean, super interesting. Yep. No, this is an actual photograph. So they have the port. They built this airport. They had to actually extend. They had to like cut off this beach, which used to extend like this, in order to have enough room for the runway. But there's interesting questions to be asked here as far as the biodiversity, and the marine resources are really incredible in Audubon. So also interesting work that could be done. Here's the context of the protected areas in Equatorial Guinea more broadly. So here you have the two on Bioko. Audubon is considered a marine reserve. You have Monte Allen, which is the main traditional focal point for conservation on the mainland. And then this is actually the area that I'll be talking about a little bit later in the presentation, where we hope to develop a new national park. Of course, as I mentioned before, I can speak too much louder. My throat's a little bit sore. As I mentioned before, a lot of these protected areas don't really have active management programs. So on Bioko, we have two national parks, the Pico Basile and the Gran Caldera Scientific Reserve. We have traditionally focused on the Gran Caldera Reserve, which is where you have all of the primates and also the nesting beaches for sea turtles down here in the south. The island is volcanic and has 3 major peaks. The highest point is over 3,000 meters. So it really is a quite dramatic landscape. And it's an ideal laboratory for studying things like evolution. It's a continental island, so all of the fauna on Bioko were at some point connected with the mainland And so you have different degrees of kind of speciation occurring. A lot of the primates are considered subspecies, and a couple are full-on species. So, yeah, and it's also one of the rainiest places in the world, I'll mention. So the weather comes from the south generally, and so you have a big gradient. The southern coast here receive up to 10 meters of rain per year, whereas Malabo only receives something like 2 meters of rain per year. But very fascinating little island, and I'm excited to share a little bit more about it with you. Just wanted to give you a sense of some of the landscapes that you encounter. It's beautiful, rugged terrain, volcanic features. You have calderas. This is a crater lake near our research station in Mocha. This is the main Pico Basile volcano. This is a volcanic cone that you had a different perspective of it in the initial photo on the cover slide. These are the Elachi waterfalls and many stunning beaches and coastlines. This is actually the crater that Luke was referring to earlier, walking up into this crater, which is right in the core of the Caldera Reserve. Of course, if you drive around Bioko, this is also what you will see, a lot of wild meat consumption. It's for sale on the sides of the roads. It's in the market. It's technically illegal in many cases, especially the primates are not allowed to be sold, but it's not enforced generally. There's some sporadic law enforcement, which I can get into. This is leatherback sea turtle pieces. And it's the context in Central Africa generally, but in particular on Bioko and in Equatorial Guinea. So just to highlight some of the key species that we focus on, this is the Bioko drill, really incredible animal. Both of these individuals are males. These photographs were taken by Justin Jay, who produced a really amazing documentary, which I recommend everyone to watch, about the drill, but also the wildlife of Bioko in general. The first time drills have been seen collecting coconuts on the beach and actually smashing them open to get the milk inside. You also have the Pennant's red colobus and the black colobus, two colobus species. They're folivores, so they're generally very slow moving and very vulnerable to hunting. They're not going to run away very quickly if they encounter a hunter. So, we think that there are probably, fewer than 1,000 individuals of each of these species left. This is a full species and subspecies. And then we have the Ecatoguineans. These are also all found on Bioko, all endemic subspecies. You have the green sea turtle and the leatherback sea turtle. They use the nesting beaches along the southern coast. Along with the beaches in Gabon, Bioko has some very important nesting beaches. And we've done a little bit of work to kind of understand the differences between those two populations. So I would classify BBPP as having 3 interconnected core components. We do research and monitoring to increase the understanding of Equatorial Guinea's natural environment. We do education and outreach to increase the appreciation and therefore the long-term sustainability of those efforts. And then conservation, direct actions to try to reduce the supply and demand of wild meat and increase the effectiveness and sustainability of the protected area system in Equatorial Guinea. So that looks like a lot of different things in practice. When it comes to research and monitoring, we have the longest running study of the bushmeat market in Malabo. We also have done over 20 years of continuous monitoring of the beaches during the turtle nesting season and the forests throughout the year to understand the dynamics of the mammals and in particular the primates. And we just facilitate science for anybody who's interested in doing science in Equatorial Guinea. So we have a lot of trained personnel, equipment, stations, and relationships that help us to facilitate science and ensure that local people are also benefiting and growing capacity through that work. So here, this is the village of Eureka. A lot of older individuals that have been working for us, sometimes for over, for even longer than the program has existed, because prior to BBPP, there was a Spanish NGO that was working with the turtles in Equatorial in Eureka as well. And actually the son of some of these individuals is Amancio, who I'll mention in a second, and has worked with Martin. And these are camera traps, passive acoustic monitors, and then morning walks where we track the sea turtles and the types of tracks that they leave behind. Research is the fundamental core of everything that we do, and it's just a sampling of some of the studies that have resulted in PhDs and publications over the last several years. Here you have Martin holding a yellow-billed turako when he recently, I think this was in 2019, you came to Equatorial Guinea to do some avian surveys. You worked with Amancio and many other young Equatoguineans, who is now one of the most talented birders in Equatorial Guinea as far as handling birds and can carry out his own studies, and is leading my program in different critical ways, and also manages our research station. So he's the individual I told you whose parents are from this small village, and then he goes on to graduate from the National University, and it's a nice success story. Of course, research needs to be translated into effective, results for society, and so that's part of what we do as well. So we do this forest monitoring, and then we can use that information to understand where the primates are, where the primates are not, what areas of the reserve need to be focused, the limited resources that we have, the limited time that we have, where we need to focus. So that can then translate into, understanding, where the primates are, how many of them there are, and what that means as far as policy and management. Likewise with the sea turtles, these figures are a little bit old, but we've been tracking the dynamics of the sea turtle population on the southern coast for many years. These are the numbers of leatherbacks and greens. There's smaller numbers of olive ridley and hawksbills as well. There's long-term dynamics as far as from year to year, how many of these species are arriving, how many nests they're laying, as well as consistent dynamics whereby the leatherbacks prefer the eastern beaches, and the greens prefer the western beaches. And from a conservation perspective, it's also interesting because these are much harder beaches to control access to, and the greens are critically endangered and being targeted by fishermen that come down from Luba and from the capital in boats. And so we need to work a lot more on protecting the turtles on these western beaches, because we have a reduced presence out there, and they're facing more severe pressures. This was an interesting study where we used satellite tags to see where the turtles were going after they laid their nests. And you can compare the differences between the Equatoguinean turtles and the Gabonese turtles. There are some similarities. All of them are occupying, the Gulf of Guinea generally, but also spending a lot of time in areas that are controlled by Equatorial Guinea. We'd like to extend the boundary of the Gran Caldera Scientific Reserve into the marine space to better control and protect them, and have more leverage to do so. But currently that's just, a part of the Gran Caldera Reserve extends into the marine space, but not far enough. And so that this study was interesting data to suggest that we need to extend that boundary. And the second big component of what we do beyond research and monitoring is education and outreach. So here's just some examples. I tried to include as many photos as I could of our team in the presentation. So when he was doing his avian work, we were able to take advantage of that with an activity that we were doing at the station with children. So he was able to teach them how to handle birds and how to measure birds. But that's just one of many examples. This is our one of the books that we've produced, children's book that we use in the classrooms. And we do things like outreach campaigns, we do radio programs, television programs. This was a public health focused announcement that we did with support from the US State Department to increase awareness of the connection between bushmeat and zoonotic diseases. And then finally, conservation, that's the end goal. We're trying to improve the outlook for these species, and that's complicated and political and involves working with people. And so I have a few examples of that. This is the workshop that where we validated a several-year-long process to create the first management plan based on BBPP's research for the Caldera Scientific Reserve. So once you have a management plan, you can do things like put up signage that the government fully is supportive of and can create zones and where you can do ecotourism and where you can do research, et cetera. We also were able to do some work with communities to develop alternative livelihood programs, chicken rearing, fishing cooperatives, things like that. And those ideas came from the communities, and then we were able to support them. And that funding came from the United Nations. Ultimately, trying to create more of a culture of conservation in this country that doesn't really have much of a history of conservation. These are just some quick examples of figures from the management plan that I referenced, where we were actually able to zone the reserve and specify areas where tourism should occur, where it should be off limits, where communities should have access to trapping, not necessarily shotgun hunting, but traditional forms of hunting for home consumption, et cetera. Of course, conservation is sometimes one step forward, two steps backwards, or two steps forwards, three steps backwards. This is a story I wanted to share where actually, and this is the way that hunting generally occurs in Equatorial Guinea, where the military is often supporting the hunting enterprises. And so this is near the village of Eureka. This is one of the Indofor Eco Guards. This is one of my staff members. These are military guys that came into the reserve and actually then employed one of our local biomonitors to take them into the forest and look for primates. And then this is a BBPP dry bag with 2 critically endangered Pennant's red colobus dead in the bag. And so, that's the type of situation that's really difficult to deal with, because this is an individual who we've been working with for many years, has young children, is going to continue to be living in Eureka for many years into the future. And in a context where, the military, who are also from the dominant ethnic group, were, pressuring him to show him things. So it's a complicated situation, but it's not all negative all the time. We've also been able to leverage our relationship with the government and the protected area system to, find where the hunting is happening, document it, and get a response from the government. So here the military has come in to actually shut down a hunting camp operation. So goes both ways. Ecotourism is a really important element of where we want to focus moving forward. It's a great opportunity to directly employ local people, and there's so much interest in the wildlife of Bioko that although it's a limited market for the time being, it has an outsized impact in these communities. And so that's something that we've been developing, and we have partners, local companies that help us to attract clients. And moving forward, the country is kind of opening their eyes to the importance of ecotourism more generally. And the vice president, who will become the next president, no doubt, has been talking more and more about it and actively consulting us about maybe what that should look like, and what's needed, as it relates to ecotourism. So I'm hopeful that this will be a focus of the government moving forward. But up until now, it hasn't really been taken advantage of. Just wanted to give you a sense of some of the people. This is a subset, not everyone that works with me. We have infrastructure, we have research camps with some impressive platforms. We have this station in Mocha that Luke knows well. And we're a fully operational program in Equatorial Guinea. This is kind of a distribution of our resources. The capital of the country is up here in the northern part of Bioko Island. Mocha is in the highlands, and then we have camps and some infrastructure on the southern coasts. I think I failed to mention earlier that this road is actually new and has been a big problem as it relates to the Caldera Reserve. So it was only completed in 2014. Before that, when I first arrived in Equatorial Guinea, you had to walk from here to get to Eureka, and it took about 8 hours. Now you can just drive, takes 30 minutes. So that's facilitated a lot of the increased pressure on wildlife. It also allows for things like ecotourism to happen a little bit more easily. So double-edged sword. Looking forward, I think Equatorial Guinea is at a really interesting point in its history. Here you have the GDP of the country from the 1960s until 2020. And you can see that really the wealth exploded in about 1995. They went from, a GDP of maybe less than $1,000 per person to over $20,000 per person. I did some research. Portugal, at the same time that Equatorial Guinea was peaking in the early, just before 2010, had a similar GDP to Equatorial Guinea. And then, of course, in the last few years, it's really gone downhill. So I think the government still has access to oil money, of course, but it's a lot less important now than it was before. And they're trying to diversify the economy. So is that going to be logging? Is that going to be ecotourism? Are they going to take advantage of some of these climate-related funds to be determined, right? It's also an important moment for us to kind of really leverage all of this work that we've done and the position that we have to help to turn the tide in the right direction. One of the things that we would really like to do this upcoming year is partner with Conservation International, and they've kind of indicated that they have money to do a rapid assessment program. And so they're just finalizing what that might look like in Equatorial Guinea. It's a big opportunity, high profile opportunity to kind of go around the country with a bunch of different tax experts and train locals as well, and have a high profile look at the biodiversity that you have throughout the country. So they produce a really shiny report, and it's a big workshop at the end with the government. And so we would like to be able to do that in 2023 or 2024, and I'm hopeful that that will happen. The other even bigger opportunity that we have is to partner with the Rainforest Trust and develop a project that actually Luke helped to create in partnership with the National Park Service, which would be to sustainably develop a new protected area on the mainland. And as I mentioned, all of the protected areas in Equatorial Guinea currently were kind of created on paper without the participation of local stakeholders. And it's something that the country kind of inherited from the Spanish. So this would be an interesting opportunity for the country to actually develop a national park the correct way, engage in free, prior, and informed consent with local communities, and really achieve buy-in, and also through the creation of this national park, engage with stakeholders like, for example, Africa Parks or the Frankfurt Zoological Society, organizations that are much more experienced in managing protected areas, and therefore would be able to partner with Equatorial Guinea in managing their entire protected area system, something that they really do need support with. So we're optimistic that this project can go forward. It would be a 5-year project. These are some figures that Luke's team developed that indicate where this national park would be here in the middle of the mainland. This is a new city that's being developed. It's actually being promoted as the new capital of Equatorial Guinea. And so this is right on the boundary of that new city. There's also a new university that's being built there. And so there's all sorts of interesting opportunities as well as risks. We would hate to see this area get logged or developed further than it already has. And it provides connectivity with 2 existing protected areas. This is a natural monument, and this is a national park. This is kind of what the mainland looks like. You have vast tracts of forest, but you also have isolated inselbergs, which creates interesting landscape. Just to zoom in on that particular area around this new capital city, this is a little video that shows how quickly it's developed over the last decade. They've built out an entire road network, only a few buildings, but what the infrastructure that they've developed is really impressive. So here's some examples of that infrastructure. This is like a 400-room, 5-star hotel with like several swimming pools. They have a health clinic, and there's a whole hospital complex also not too far nearby, the golf course. And this is the national park that we're talking about. Like, it's literally adjacent to the national park, as well as the campus of the new university, also adjacent to the new national park. But I mean, they're building highways all across the country, and so this is a really important time to kind of solidify and help the country manage their natural environment. Here's that same image with this research plot that the Biodiversity Initiative, Luke's project, established. And these are several, I'm about to show you just a few camera trap videos that were taken in that little tiny plot. So, just imagine what's in the rest of the reserve, and it's all to be discovered. So we have a leopard, lowland African forest elephants, chimps, mother with a baby. There's another mother with a baby. And all of these images were taken via the collaboration with the technicians in the National Park Service. So there's a real active collaboration there. Silverback gorilla. So just to kind of wrap this all together, I would say that the take-home message here is that we have this really incredible program that's focused historically on the island, but we have all these new opportunities emerging. And I think what we have is quite unique. It's a partnership with the National University. There are other potential partners out there. This new university on the mainland is on paper a partner, but we have yet to really materialize that partnership and create opportunities for students and researchers. We have a well-trained staff, a lot of partners, infrastructure, and I think it's a model platform that we can use to leverage all sorts of new research efforts and needed initiatives. In general, the African rainforest is relatively poorly understood, and I think that's a huge component of why this Gulf of Guinea research program is being set up. And there are increasing opportunities to finance some of this work, not only private donors, but also leveraging climate change funds. And Jeff Bezos has committed billions of dollars to the Congo Basin, and has yet to distribute that money yet as well. So we will see. But both the new institutions in Equatorial Guinea as well as our traditional partners are eager for us to do more work, and are excited to partner with us on future activities. So, there are also challenges that we'll have to deal with. I think the financial sustainability of the BBPP is something that really needs a hard look at. We need a more formal structure as far as our governance. And, I think where CIBIO and a partnership with CIBIO would really come to help us is just being able to attract a wide body of researchers that could really kind of tailor their research interests with the needs of the country. And of course, continuing to build up the capacity of young Equatoguineans, like Amancio, like so many others that work with me. Many of those individuals have had a lot of opportunities to grow their skill sets in country, but are now at the stage in their career where they really should go and get their master's elsewhere, or at least work on that through international partnerships. So I'm optimistic that this will be able to continue and that we'll be able to grow the partnership. I think there's a lot of really exciting work on the horizon, and I'm happy to answer any questions.